special meeting, or the council could choose 2 members to kind of represent the council and interview them and then report back. So it's up to the council. What would you like to do? Do you have any questions on any of the proposals that we received?
I thought I could see why you selected each firm. I thought they all had very interesting background, and every one of them had some experience with the village. And on the National Historic Landmark consideration, I was reading for that, and I found it I think in each case, actually. So I'm happy with that. Whether or not we want to do this in regular meeting or have a special meeting is the question, and then how to do this all in one night or 2 nights or 2 sessions, I don't know. So I'm open to ideas on that. Does the staff have any recommendation from your point of view that would be better than another, and we can consider that, Doug?
I'm assuming you all want to be involved in it, so I would recommend that we hold a separate meeting on a different night, maybe an off Tuesday, where you can all come and meet and have the 3 interviews.
Okay. So do it on one night with all 3 firms, but not a regular council meeting night.
Right.
A 3rd or a 4th Tuesday or other. And we'll have to check people's schedules and how that can fit in. And in Dr. Morgan's case, he'll speak for himself, but we need some advance notice to have you here, Jeff.
I appreciate the advance notice. I'll throw it out there. You mentioned 2 individuals interviewing. I've got no problem with Patrick and Lydia as interviewers on there to do that for the council. I would support that.
I like the separate meeting idea. I'm fine with 2 of us also, but I just think, I assume this will be a public, if we're going to have 5 of us in a special meeting, be public, and I think,
yeah, it would.
I think we can take advantage of these proposals as far as reassuring the public that we had some quality proposals, because I too was very impressed with them. I have seen proposals before for projects, not libraries, but similar projects in the government. And one of the things I always do is I go to the resumes they attach right away to see how the seriousness of the players they're putting up. And usually there's a bunch you can eliminate right away. They've got, first-year project manager or something. This was very impressive. And the fact that you had 3 of them come up like that was, I think part of it may be the attractiveness of doing this in Pinehurst on this historical location. Yeah, I would look forward to hearing them. I gather, from a logistical standpoint, we'd hear from 3 of them, and then we cogitate and in a week or 2 make a recommendation. Is that how you're envisioning it?
Yeah, I don't think you need to make a selection that night, but at the next council meeting, I think would be appropriate.
I might as well ask this, is there the variance on price? Is it?
So these are without a price proposal, so we would negotiate with whoever was the top rated firm at that point.
Okay.
They all are aware of what our budget is.
Okay. Yeah, I'm fine that way. Again.
And I'm not going to suggest that you have to follow this process, but what we've done to help the council make a decision in the past is we have, in consultation with the council, we've developed a list of criteria that you would all score each applicant against.
Absolutely.
And
I prefer that.
we'll work on that for you.
I like the process that we did with small area plans, and did we bring them all in back to back on the same day? I can't remember, but I liked all of us interviewing them, and then all of us doing the score sheets, and then you guys take them and do what you do and come. What's your recollection about how we did small area plan interviews?
I don't recall we did 3 in a day. We've done 2, I think, in one of the selections. Maybe it was the library. I'm not sure.
There were 3.
Was it? There were 3?
I think there were 3, yeah.
I'm pretty sure there
Well,
were
we did
3.
them in one. We did do them in one day.
Maybe I'm thinking about, no, it was small area plans, yeah. And I think we did do them on the same day as well.
Same day, but not a council day.
Who-
That probably was a council
Separate
day.
meeting,
Yeah.
yeah,
Decided later.
right. You went back and thought about what you heard and did your,
Right.
filled out your score sheet, and then we brought you back together to make the decision.
So if we did something like that, over what period of time? Could we do it in 3 hours?
My thought was, I mentioned this, but we had a 20-minute presentation and then 15-minute question and answer. And then we could schedule them at roughly every 45 minutes to an hour apart, and then we can have a little break in between.
I would think we might need more than 15 minutes for Q&A.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it could be done over several hours, maybe starting in the middle of a day. If Jeff Morgan is not, is okay with not being present, I think I would like to be present. And so maybe it's the other council members as well. But Jeff, did you have a further comment on that? Participation?
Yeah, actually, I had a snarky comment after the thing, just for a chuckle, but we'll avoid, not snarky, a humorous one. But the point is, yes, I'd like to try to make it if I can, if the council's going to be there, okay? What timeframe are we talking? We talking the October timeframe? We talking September timeframe? What are we talking here?
Well, if we were going to do the every other Tuesday, I was going to recommend the 4th.
Of
Oh,
October?
sorry, yeah.
Be September 30?
So we meet, your council meets on the 27th of September, so the week after.
27th, yeah. Mhm. All right, so it'd be in the first week of October, Jeff, I guess.
What date?
It'd be in the first week of October, I think is what Doug is suggesting.
Tuesday, October 4th.
Not a council day.
October.
Okay,
Yeah.
it is unlikely I'll be able to make that at this stage of the game.
So you'd need a full 4 weeks or something to schedule
Yeah,
out a time?
if
Or
you
what
were-
about the
if you
day of
were-
the week? What about the day of the week?
If you were in the following week with that, starting on the week of the 10th, I'm more flexible in working that one out. Making
So
that
the
happen.
weekend, so maybe I might suggest, rather than that week, the week after that. So it's,
Okay. That-
it's
that-
in
that-
between council meetings rather than,
Yeah,
That would be October 18th.
Yes. So the week after, basically the week of the 10th, after that, I've got more flexibility in making it happen.
okay, so we're pushing it out a month, though, from where we are today.
And the other option on there is the 4 of you go through this and do that. I'm comfortable with 2 people interviewing. I'm
Sure.
comfortable with 4 people interviewing. And let's just make it legal. The point is, even when you have 2 people doing it, it needs to come up to the entire council and talk about it. I want to hear a report as to what's going on.
Right.
And be able to have input on it from a council perspective. But I certainly trust this body to interview people and come up with a rating scheme.
And Doctor, if you have questions you want us to ask, you can just submit them.
Zoom in?
Yeah, or,
There's a possibility I can on doing that, yes. So there's some business travel I actually have scheduled at this point in time for that day. And I think it's the 5th of October timeframe is the date, if I remember correctly. And I will be out of the coast.
Okay.
I'll add real quick, there's not a huge rush with our deadline being
Okay.
being not to start construction until after the open. We do have a little time.
So looking at the teens of October, whether it's the 18th or whatever, that's a convenient time. And was the 18th, what day of the week is it?
Day evening, or
That is
that's
a-
a Tuesday.
I'm not here.
Would
I'm
we
out
prefer a different day of the week? Since it's an open week.
And again, I am comfortable
Sure,
with you
I
all
understand.
interviewing the thing. I don't
Yep.
think there's any malfeasance in that. You've got 4 people on there. You're going to ask good questions. We'll be working with this. My president, I would like a brief as to what happened if I'm unable to zoom in. That's all. Okay? So I trust my colleagues here to do the
You'll
right thing. for us.
participate if you can. If you can't, you'll have a report from us
Exactly.
anyway.
And
have
make
further
sure
input.
it's all legal for whatever I have to do. I apologize for not being able to attend that, but I'm prior schedule.
No, it's fine. Also, if we can coordinate a meeting time via email separately, so we don't have to do it during this meeting.
Some options and
Yeah.
All right, so we've agreed to say the 3rd week of October. We can discuss the day of the week and exactly how the timing will work. But we'll try to do all 3 on a day
Yeah.
with appropriate spacing between so that we, and an appropriate time for Q&A. And and presentation. I don't want anybody to feel rushed, but I don't think we need to spend 2 hours on any of the given names.
Yep,
I think.
sounds good.
Jeff, does that work for you?
Yep.
And from the staff point of view? Okay. Doug, thank you very much.
And John, I appreciate that, and I agree also, you don't need 2 hours. That was kind of my humorous comment, was the, as we're going through there, I think we can probably do this in an hour per person, so, or per team.
Good. That leads us to item number 3, peddling and soliciting.
Yeah.
Jeff, this is
so,
this interesting point on this.
I think Kelly's going to wind up doing a lot of the talking here, but to try to set the stage, we do regulate peddling and solicitation in our municipal code, and we have a, I think what's might be viewed as a fairly liberal policy stance right now when compared to a lot of other communities. We simply require folks to come and ask for a permit. And some of the language is defunct, if you will, now, some of the requirements. There was a point in time when we could require applicants to submit to a background check, and we'd do that background check, doing police records check to make sure we're not dealing with people who have a felony history or something. That's no longer supported by law. It's not clear to us when that change was made. But the truth is that for whatever reason, we really don't get a lot of requests for peddling and solicitation permits. I think in the last year or so, it's only been 4 or 5.
What type of requests do we get?
Well, sometimes sometimes you get requests for, here's an example, the Jehovah's Witness,
Oh, okay.
right? Type of a situation. And that's a whole special category. There's a whole special category of this stuff that we can't really tamper with that much because of free speech requirements that have been settled in national courts and stuff. So, but then we also have things, requests occasionally for commercial activity. And this typically has not been a problem, but I will say that we had one that was a little problematic this summer that was going around soliciting the opportunity to apply lawn chemicals or something. I mean, it was but their methods and their approaches didn't sit well with a lot of our residents, and we wound up getting a lot of phone calls on these people. So we started to dig into it. So maybe to set the stage on this, I talked about the fact that we don't actually accommodate, or we're not asked to accommodate a whole lot of peddling and solicitation permits. And so really the impact on our community is very small, one way or the other. But when we were looking at this situation this summer and recognizing the fact that we can't do background checks, we started to ask ourselves whether or not we really want to be as permissive as we had been in the past, given the fact that, once you give a person a permit to go out there and peddle, I'll use the peddling option, that they're going up and banging on people's doors, and some people are not all that comfortable with them, and without being able to put our village, seal of approval on whether or not this person has a criminal history that we should be concerned about, maybe we shouldn't be allowing that. And I mentioned the fact that there's the whole free speech side of this thing that we can't really tamper with. So, I think that we have to continue to allow for permitting for no fee, with a guarantee of an issue of a permit for certain categories of solicitors, not peddlers, but solicitors. But we wanted to engage you in a conversation about whether or not you thought it'd be appropriate to pull back on the permitting opportunity that currently exists for, I think, peddling. more so. So Kelly, I hope I didn't steal all your thunder, but
Thank you. Good evening, council. As Jeff stated, this kind of started early in the summer when we first found out that the police department could no longer complete the background checks that we require as part of our application process. So we began searching for other avenues, such as asking our current Human Resources Department if they can do the background checks just as they do for our employees. That as well was not an option. They are restricted from doing so. So we went back and did a little bit of research about how many of these requests we get from solicitors, how many we get from nonprofit organizations, just to kind of get a recap on what kind of impact this would have on our community if we eliminated some of the need. So the general statute that we are regulated under is 160A 179, which is the regulation of begging. So it states pretty broadly, a city may by ordinance prohibit or regulate begging or otherwise canvassing the public for contributions for the private benefit of the solicitor or any other person. So it allows the municipality to have some rule on what they will allow within our community. Currently, our permit states that no person, except as provided herein, shall canvass, solicit, or sell food, beverages, services, or merchandise, or engage in any act of canvassing or soliciting in any public or quasi-public place, door to door or place to place, within the village without first having obtained a permit, therefore in accordance with the provisions of this chapter. And we do, as I stated, have a application process right now. It was kind of two different processes, one for those who are nonprofit organizations. Those could include civic organizations, fire, police, ambulance, as well as some of our groups within the town that fit under just 501c3s in general. Then we also had another process that was for those businesses for profit that were asking for a permit to solicit. The difference is with the businesses, what we requested of them was to provide the identification, two different ones, and to sign an acknowledgement that they would undergo a background check. So that then would be sent to the police department for the chief of police to run the background check, and then from that, he would make a decision on whether to approve or deny. If it was approved, it would come back to the village clerk to issue the permit. For nonprofits, they would fill out the same information without that being required, and the village clerk would decide whether it was approved or denied. The other difference is for nonprofits, we do not have a charge and fee of $10, whereas the profit we did. We did have some exceptions already listed in our 11010, and that is, again, those that are political party candidates, organizations, programs accepting donations, contributions for any political candidate, any religious, charitable, recreational, civic, or veterans organization. And as Jeff said, a lot of those come from the First Amendment rights.
yeah, and I think that I was going to add that. I think when you look at this list, I think this is the list that Mike is advising us that we have an obligation to issue a permit for no fee.
Oh, I see, for no fee.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, for no fee. That is the big difference between the two. These are some of the things currently that are on our application that we do ask for. These are for the nonprofit side. Again, we would still be able to continue to ask for these things, the same as we were doing before. The exception would be we would eliminate that background check acknowledgement form.
So we can gather information about the person or organization, but we can't do a background check on any of that, the organization or person.
That is correct. The statute allows us to continue to gather names, so names of boards for organizations. We can gather for each person that is out canvassing. So if there was more than one, we would be still able to ask for information on their registration for their vehicles, their personal information. So, and that would still pass to the police department, which is what it does now. As soon as I issue a permit, that permit is passed to the police department so that they have it on record for their dispatch and for their officers.
And what the permitting opportunity really is getting at, and what the law allows is for us to validate that the person is who they say they are and they represent who they say they represent.
You know, and Jeff, as I listen to you guys, and I think, why is the village in the business of giving private individuals the right to go onto somebody else's property? But then as I think through it, we're not giving the right to these people to go onto that property. We're just collecting information on these people, so if something does go wrong.
That's right. We
But-
can't regulate whether or not somebody is allowed on somebody else's private property.
And I think it's important to make that distinction. I mean, I can see a private person saying, well, to us, why are you giving that person permission to come onto my property? We're not giving permission. We are just collecting valuable information for when this happens. That's the benefit of this.
Now, and on the peddling side, we actually can say you may not peddle. So, in other words, you can't use our public streets to navigate to go do an act of trying to get on somebody's private property.
And I fully support that. The only peddling I want to see on private property is a bicycle, tricycle, and a big wheel. In today's day and age, the idea of peddling on private property is passé. I mean, you got the internet, you got all kinds of other modalities. Back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, I can understand where Stofers is going by trying to do stuff, but we don't need that now. We don't need that in Pinehurst. I got no problem eliminating that whole thing at this stage.
And plumbers and landscapers and stuff put their 800 numbers on their trucks. I mean, if you're, want to get a hold of them, you can. You know, they've got social media and Angie's List and everything.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like peddling is really necessary to have anymore. I mean,
Typically, yeah.
yeah, there's Girl Scout cookies. You want to be able to have the Girl Scout cookies going around, right? That's still, and, you know, a lot of schools sell gift wrap. You know, the kids go and sell gift wrap on the street, up and down their streets.
Yeah, but even
That,
with
I
that,
guess, would fall under the civic organization thing, right?
and when my daughter was selling Girl Scout cookies, either I went with her or my wife went with her. Okay, and every kid that's soliciting and stuff like that, it's a different category, and I don't think that's going to be a problem here. What we're talking about is a stranger coming into the town,
Yeah.
walking from door to door. We do not need that in Pinehurst. I got no problem cutting that out completely.
And an oddity about the one situation we had this summer was this particular company had gone out and hired like 4 or 5 different people to do this peddling, solicitation, peddling, whatever you want to call it, in the village of Pinehurst and other places, and none of them were from North Carolina. All of them had driver's licenses from like,
Arizona,
Nevada,
Nevada.
Arizona,
Correct.
Michigan. I mean, it was just weird.
Correct.
Yeah, no, that's not good.
Okay, so what we're here today is to get some guidance then on how council would like to proceed. You'll see that we do have a couple options there. We can prohibit door-to-door peddling, soliciting, canvassing for both profit, and I said nonprofit, with the exemption of those that are religious, political. The second choice is we can prohibit it only for those profit individuals, which he's talking about for soliciting of sales. And then we could continue to allow both in accordance with our current Chapter 100 with the changes, which would be in the process of the application on how we do, and that would be pulling out that background check And then we would have to change the verbiage on what the process then is for the appeal process, which currently states that appeal must go to the chief of police, who has made the determination. So those are really the three options that we can choose. It sounds like here that,
I support the top bullet for both profit and nonprofit organizations and stopping and prohibiting it. I just.
Except for the ones where we're obligated.
Exactly.
with the current exemptions that we
The
have
current
now.
exemptions that we have to by state law.
You have the list of exemptions, just so.
Yes. So the exemptions are those.
Oh, number 2.
Yes.
1 and 2, I guess.
So those are what are currently in ours, and those are what are protected by the First Amendment rights.
And those are coming from the state of North Carolina, from.
Correct.
We're Dillon State, so we have no, it's not a conversation because we must accept it.
I don't think that the state of North Carolina actually addresses this specifically
Okay.
in the general statutes. This comes from settled federal court cases. I think that this list was originally developed under Mike Newman's advice many, many years ago, but.
Correct.
I have no problem with that.
Well, if we adopted the first option, which is the most absolutely restricted except for these exceptions, do you anticipate any pushback from that, or are we overlooking? I mean, you've obviously thought through this.
I can give you the numbers for like this year, we have had 5. 3 of those have been, one was for sale for cleaning trash cans within the area. One was for mosquito spraying, and that was business cards. And the third one was for the chemical spraying of the lawns. The other 2 were just individuals canvassing for, one was for Girl Scouts, so it was.
I'm not going to
just
argue
community.
against what we're thinking is a preferred option here, but I just want to add for your consideration that I think some of the thought process behind allowing but permitting is that we're better to know who they are, allow it and know who they are than not allow it and have them do it behind our back, and we don't, so you just have this activity that's happening in your community because people know you don't permit it, so they're not going to ask you about it.
And one of the things I will note is that we do offer, we keep these at the front desk, and it's within our ordinance, that the private citizens can come in and request these from us, and they say no soliciting per village ordinance, so they can put that within their windows. And that helps take care of that problem of people coming from the public walkway to their private residence, which we cannot control.
So Jeff Sanborn, you're saying allow the permit so we can collect the information rather than prohibit it when we can't collect the information.
Well, we would have no mechanism. So, there's the whole, there's a school of thought or a thought process out there that sometimes you're better off to allow things and have a process for people to come forward and identify themselves than to prohibit it, and instead they do it anyway, but we just don't know, or you haven't collected their identity, or so for example, if something bad happened and we had but the person was permitted, well, we'd have a copy of their driver's license. We know who they are. And our police department could follow up on the complaint, based on that information. But if
I'm not going to buy into the argument too strongly. Just number one, we've only had, 5 people total for the solicitations. Second thing on there is that if you have something to hide, you're not going to go get a permit anyway. So we potentially have people that are soliciting at this junction right now that are not going and registering themselves because they're concerned that they may be identified as someone who's not going to be able to get it. Or you also have the fact that maybe they don't know it. It's not ever come up to me by any of the citizenry that I've talked to as being a problem. I do think that if we prohibit it, it also gives the citizens a very clear thing. Hey, someone's soliciting. Call the police and address it. So I don't really think that that's a big factor that would dissuade me from going to prohibit for-profit, nonprofit organizations.
I wasn't suggesting it was. I just wanted to add that other consideration.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
No, it's your role to play devil's advocate.
Does Glenn Webb have any particular view on this as to permitting or not permitting? Would he prefer it to one way or the other, the police?
I don't think we asked.
We did. Actually, I had a conversation with both Chief and Ken Hall, and they both expressed that they would be just fine if we did not have permitting.
Just prohibit it?
Yes, because they did not feel comfortable now because they cannot check and do backgrounds. His concern was not so much for local groups, but was for those sales, just like we had this instance. And that instance is a good one to bring up because they did, even after we alerted them to some of the things that they were doing, they still continued to go out in. They were looking in windows and knocking on doors well after 6 o'clock, well beyond our extension of our time. And so then another instance was that they were not driving the vehicle that was given to us, the information when we registered. So it goes back to, I think, what Councilmember Morgan is saying. If somebody's out there and they want to do something that's illegal, they're going to do it. I think that's a rarity. In 2021, we had 3 individuals apply for a permit. 2020, we had 4, and in 2019, we had 2. So,
If we prohibit it and then somebody still does it, then what? And the homeowner, the resident calls the police department, and then what? What's the penalty for doing this if it's prohibited? Is there a penalty?
We would have to define that in our updated ordinance.
yeah, we currently have a penalty for if, their license or their permit is revoked. I mean, if and it's $500 penalty.
Is it worth considering a penalty if we prohibit it and they do? I don't know the answer to it. It's just if
Yeah.
we say we're going
I think we're going to have to develop that language. Yeah.
Further deterrent. Not that the type of people we're trying to
So-
prevent are going to be deterred, but.
So we would prohibit it, but if someone was doing it and we were able to
Gotcha.
find them,
Yeah.
they would be fined.
Yeah. So
And we don't,
accordance with
and you we'd have to have some language in here saying that the village will fine someone who is found soliciting, which is prohibited in Pinehurst.
Yeah, I think what I'm suggesting is that, based on what we're hearing now, we'll go back and develop the language that prohibits it and also then suggest a penalty that you consider
Yeah,
in
okay,
the
so we
text
would have
amendment.
that, yeah, we would have a penalty that we could use if in fact people were caught doing this. Well, I'm okay with the first bullet point, and with the understanding as you just described of a fine being in our code. Yeah. Okay. Everybody okay on that? Go with option number 1 or bullet point 1? Okay,
All right, thank
Thank
you.
you, Kelly.
Thank you, council.
all right. Moving on,
Doing again? We're doing option number 1?
Yep.
bullet point 1.
No Girl Scout cookies?
No, they have,
You're
they're
covered.
exempt. They're an exemption.
Okay,
There are some exceptions, and that would be covered there.
all right, good. Sorry?
No. Item number 4, stormwater management.
Thank you. All right.
Mike?
Want to say anything, or me go?
Go ahead,
Okay.
Mike.
Appreciate it. Good evening, everybody. So we're here tonight to give an update on our stormwater management and master plan project, but I will say this is a little more than an update that I'm going to provide tonight. We do have our consultants here, and they have some preliminary recommendations that I think we'd like to present. Not here, those are not final recommendations. This is not the first, or this is not the last time this will be in front of you. So at the end of that, if you want to provide some feedback or comments or questions or anything, feel free to do so. However, if you'd rather just kind of noodle on it and provide that later, that's okay too. But before we talk about the recommendations, though, I want to make sure we understand kind of where we're at right now, the current policies that we have in place, state laws that pertain to us with regard to stormwater, kind of what led to us doing this project, and what the total scope of work is. And an example is, you know, we've talked a lot in the past since I've been here about changing our requirements of the 10-year storm, maybe going to a 25-year storm. I want to talk about what that really means. Let's get specific about that. And if that's something we want to do, let's talk about the implications of that. I do have a PowerPoint presentation. I will say this PowerPoint is similar to the presentation that we gave a few months ago at the public input meeting, but we've added some preliminary recommendations to that. So I'm going to do the first part, and our consultant will do the second part. Again, they're preliminary, not final. And if you see anything that's, I guess, way out of whack with a road that we're going down that we don't need to go down, I would say let us know, and we can implement that into the plan. Okay? So I'm Mike Apke, by the way, Public Services and Engineering Director for the village. We have a project oversight group that is overseeing this project, and that includes myself, Jeff Batten, Darren Burrich, and Megan Skellerup, who's our Assistant Public Services Director. Our consultant is McGill Associates. Michael Hansen is sitting next to me. He's the lead on the project, and then David Honeycutt is sitting back in the audience. He manages the Pinehurst office for McGill. So they're both here to answer questions if need be. Up, Kelly. There we go. There we go. So we've engaged McGill to assist with the preparation of a stormwater management and master plan. This stems from the 2019 comprehensive plan, which identified the expansion and enhancement of stormwater management efforts as a strategic opportunity, and it included several recommendations related to stormwater. Those were to prepare a comprehensive stormwater master plan, to identify effective stormwater management strategies, to evaluate creating a local stormwater utility for planning, programming, and coordinating future stormwater infrastructure in the community. And we'll talk about the utility a little bit later. And then the third thing was to develop and implement rules for post-construction stormwater maintenance requirements. So that's stormwater ponds and infrastructure that's out there. Right now, our engineering standards manual says all stormwater management facilities shall be properly maintained by the property owner. That's our rule. Shall be properly maintained. Well, what does that mean? Are there specifics that people need to be doing? Are there guidelines for that? How do we enforce that? What do we do if they aren't doing that? So I think that's where the recommendation of developing the post-construction stormwater maintenance requirements came from. And we elected to do all three of these in our stormwater master plan to incorporate that. So just to be very basic real quick, what is stormwater? I define it typically as just water that naturally accumulates as a result of rain or snow. Yeah, we did have some snow this past winter, but mostly rain. And much of our stormwater infiltrates into our soils, our sandy soils, but what doesn't infiltrate typically runs off across land, other impervious surfaces like rooftops, streets, parking lots, etc. And at times, heavy rain can result in localized flooding of streets, yards, or even basements or crawl spaces in low-lying areas. So, who's responsible for managing the stormwater? A lot of people think it's the Village of Pinehurst's responsibility to manage every drop of water that falls within the Village of Pinehurst, and that's simply not the case. Property owners are ultimately responsible for managing stormwater across their land, including residential lots. And we, as a property owner, are subject to the same rules and regulations as private property owners on our properties and within our right-of-way. The pipes, the ditches that are within our right-of-way, which is typically 50 or 60 feet wide, are the responsibility of the village. But what's on private property is responsibility of the private property owner. We do about 25 to 30 small drainage projects each year, or we have since I've been here, and our allocation in the FY23 budget that the council gave us is $385,000 for those small drainage projects.
What exactly is a small drainage project?
I don't know that we define small. We don't do anything. We're usually $30,000 or less.
So it's
It's
a
usually,
piece of equipment.
it's-
It's not, we're not talking about a couple of shovels.
it is typically, oh no, we're typically excavating. It's typically a storm inlet box. It is a pipe replacement that maybe has failed. It may be a new pipe in some areas. It is not running a mile of pipe down the road, but it's in a, in a neighborhood or something like that.
I get the picture. Thanks.
Sure. So when we talk about what we maintain, this is just some examples. In this area, there's a roadside swale, and if we need to clear that out, we will do that because it's in our right-of-way. Of course, there's pipes that go underneath the roads. There are boxes, these boxes that some people tell us are real ugly that are around. We maintain those as well. But those items that are within the right-of-way are ours to maintain. Now, this is a snippet from our stormwater map. The purple lines are the pipes. This is an area on Diamond Head Drive. And you can see the property lines are here in orange. And so this would be our right-of-way. And the area kind of highlighted in green here, these two boxes, these pipes are within our right-of-way, and those are items that we would maintain. In this case, there's a pipe that extends from that box down to the lake that goes across private property. We don't maintain that by our current policies. Our engineering standards manual says, the Village of Pinehurst shall maintain only the storm sewer systems located within village-maintained rights-of-way and on village-owned property, unless a drainage easement has been offered and accepted by the village. Our PDO says the village shall accept no responsibility to maintain any storm drain structures or easements except for those lying within the village right-of-way or traversing village-owned property. And we also have a policy and procedures document that says the VOP may provide maintenance for storm drainage structures within its legal street rights-of-way to the extent necessary to protect the integrity of safety of the adjacent street. There's at least 3 references that I have found that talk about us only maintaining what is within our right-of-way. We get quite a few complaints about this pipe right here is something is wrong with it. You guys need to come in and fix it. And unfortunately, based on the current policy, we are unable to do that. I will add, the gentleman that was here earlier, Mr. Gleisner, has a similar situation to this diagram right here. He lives on Lake Forest Drive. There is a box that we have talked about replacing in our right-of-way. There is a pipe that goes, I believe, across his neighbor's property, but between he and his neighbor's property. We don't own that pipe. My suspicion is that the issues he has experienced are because that pipe is stopped up and clogged. And
Let me ask
Go
you a
ahead.
question.
Sure.
So is the water running downhill from Diamond Head Drive to the lake?
it is.
So if you didn't have that pipe, the water would just flow across that property rather than into the,
Correct. It's going to get to the lake eventually. That's why the lake is there.
and that's my point. The pipe, all of your infrastructure there keeps that water from just going across the entire piece, well, the private property on the surface,
Correct.
which could cause even more damage. Well,
Presumably, sure. Mhm. And I'll say this too, we have plenty of cases where we've got a box and it may not be a pipe that goes down there, but it may discharge at the right-of-way line, and then there's a ditch or a swale that goes down there. And we get calls for people that say, can you come clean that out? Well, it's not on our property, there's no easement, and our policies all say that we're not going on private property. So I just want to make that point. I don't think that's very uncommon. Most municipalities that I've heard of, that when they talk about stormwater management, they maintain what's within their right-of-way. I know you've dealt with some of that in Pinewild in the past, Lydia, too, with the POA, and I think they were the same way, correct? Where they only deal with what's in their right-of-way?
correct.
Yeah.
And because, I mean, you know what I said, if you don't own it, don't touch it, because, I mean,
Yes.
this is just, I mean, how many examples like this are there in the village where you've got a pipe running under private property, and if you touch one, you've got to touch all of them? And that's just, I'm not saying what the answer is, but that's an important consideration, is if you touch one, you've got to touch all of them.
And that's an issue with people. That's a complaint we get. They don't understand that there is a pipe on their property and that it's something that is their responsibility to maintain. We actually developed a pamphlet about a year and a half ago, and when we go, and so it kind of details some of the stuff that is in this presentation, but a lot of the rules and the regulations, and it talks about that in there. We're maintaining what's in our right-of-way. Water's going to flow downhill. And so we've given a lot of these out. But
I think it's hard for people to understand too. It's like, well, wait a minute, this water is coming from a public road. It's coming from uphill regardless of where it's coming from, and it's running downhill to the lake.
right.
And that's North Carolina. It's so silly to say North Carolina law is premised on the fact that water runs downhill, but
It is.
and you have to get your head around that to understand some of the measures that are taken or not taken.
Correct. And I'm going to talk about North Carolina law here in just a minute, too. So, did you have
I've got
something?
some questions.
Yeah. Do you want to say them now, or you want to wait till the end?
Let me ask a couple.
Sure, go ahead.
So in going through the information that was in the Novus agenda, says that the current ESSM provides regulation for new subdivisions and for commercial development.
Correct.
But do we regulate development on individual residential lots, infill lots and so forth? If you're building a house and you're wedging it into a small lot, it's not a new subdivision,
Correct.
but it's a previously undeveloped lot, and all of a sudden now you're going to be, like Archimedes in the bathtub, throwing a bunch more water onto your neighbors. Is that regulated?
It is not, Darren, let me clarify that, but no, that is, the engineering standards manual is specific to new subdivisions. So yeah, if you buy a big tract of land and divide it into 40 lots, yes, you are subject to the stormwater requirements in there. Commercial sites, commercial buildings with parking lots and things like that, yes, you're subject to that. But infill lots, no. Now, I will say that is part of what we're looking at as
Yeah, that
as
seems like
this
it's not a
plan,
good
so,
idea not to.
yeah.
not to
Yeah, we've
regulate
heard
that.
from a few that.
Okay, I have a
feel
couple
lots
more
they-
questions.
And,
about
and
that.
look, can I add one more thing to that? We get a lot of complaints about that. Like my neighbor built next
I
to
would
me.
imagine you
And
did.
and I know Darren gets a lot of complaints to that too. So that is something that we hear a lot of.
Right. So apparently the rule is that post-development runoff, the volume of post-development runoff is not supposed to exceed the volume of pre-development runoff.
Not volume, rate, runoff rate.
Rate?
Rate. Rate, correct.
So the volume can be exceeded?
It can.
Oh, see, that's not good.
Look,
Not good.
let me show you
That's
this,
not
because
good.
you're on my next slide, Jane. So, okay.
And then what about changing the direction of flow? Is it all right for people to change the direction of flow? And a related question, is it okay to change what had been sheet flow to a point source? That can't be good either.
All good questions. Let me start with your 10-year storm thing, and I'm having all kinds of problems with this thing. Here we go. Yeah. It's going backwards, it's not going forwards. Kelly, can you maybe move the slides up a little bit? Can you do that over there? Because this is not, when I'm scrolling, it's not doing anything. Go one more, and then we'll come back to that one. Okay. So the 10-year event, I want to talk about a 10-year storm for a minute. So NOAA, which is, I had to write that down, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, right? So they have guidelines for what different storm events are all across the country. And so a 10-year event in Pinehurst, according to them, is 5.45 inches of rain over a 24-hour period. Now, there are different increments to that, too. There's a 1 hour, 10-year event, but for the purposes of our engineering manual, a 10-year storm event is 5.45 inches, let's just say 5.5 inches over 24 hours. 25-year event is about 6.5 inches over 24 hours. So it's only another inch. And then when we get to the 100-year event, we're 8 inches over 24 hours.
The difference seems so little. Is it really a bigger difference as a practical matter? Well, no, but between 5 inches and 6 inches, it's a 10-year versus a 25-year
Well,
storm?
can I ask
That's
a
correct.
question? How many 10-year events have we had in the last 10
Right.
years?
So a 10-year storm event, it has a 10% chance of occurring in any given year. That's the definition of it.
All right.
I am not sure whether the two hurricanes that came through in 17 or 18 gave us 5.45 inches in 24 hours or not. I want to say you guys went back and looked at a little bit of that and did not find a 10-year storm event for over a 24-hour period. Now, I will tell you this. The problems that we experience, the calls that we get are not due to the long sustained rains. I don't know how much it rained on Saturday. It wasn't 5.5 inches, I get that, but it rained pretty much all day. Didn't really get any complaints. The complaints that we get are a few Sundays ago when it rained 3 inches in about an hour and a half on Sunday morning and just washed a bunch of stuff away. The infrastructure that we do have can't handle that, and so in pipes, may have gotten overwhelmed, ditches may have gotten overwhelmed. Those are the complaints that we get.
And Mike, I remember that NOAA table, it even has that, like if it rains 3 inches in an hour, that's considered it gives the hourly
It does.
figures on that. It's a fascinating table. You can find it on the website.
Yeah, I've got a copy of it with me, and I can share that if people want that. But for the purposes of what we regulate in the standards manual, the 10-year, 24-hour storm is there. So let me go back to your volume versus rate question. So this is just a fairly simple graphic example of what that would be. So if you got a vacant piece of property, let's say, and there's an engineering analysis done with it, in a 10-year storm event, the maximum rate that comes off the site is 5 CFS. I just picked a number, 5
CFS.
cubic feet per second.
What?
Cubic feet per second. It's just that's typically the term that we use for stormwater. All right, somebody comes in and develops that. Not necessarily a single-family lot, but let's say this is a commercial building. They have a parking lot. They have some sidewalks. They have, additional impervious surface. Well, now all of a sudden, do that same analysis, and it's 10 cubic feet per second that comes off of there. Well, what they do to get with the standard, this thing is getting me, okay, is to put an SCM, stormwater control measure, in there. That could be an underground system, that could be a storm pond, something that all that flow goes to, it holds it, and then it releases it to either the same or previous rate. So again, it's rate. So there may be more stormwater that leaves the site over the course of a day, 2 days, whatever, but it is a lower rate. That is what our current standard is.
It is the rate that matters. Going back to your observation about it, the complaints that we get come from the,
Big
the
rush.
Yeah, the thing where you have 3 inches in 30 minutes or an hour, it's the rate that's the problem. It's not when you have it spread out over a day.
Is the SCM like I call it a retaining pool at Pinehurst Elementary School?
That is at one SCM, yes.
This one. Thank you.
And technically, the rate, if you were to have 5.5 inches of rain coming in a 24-hour period, well, then if you had 2.75 inches coming in 12 hours, the rate is equivalent. Now, you have a volume issue that's there, certainly when you talk about it, but it's how much water is coming down at a short period of time. And so I totally agree. It comes down to rate makes sense in there. But what you're describing here is a straight volume aspect, cubic feet, it's not straight volume, it has a rate, you're saying per second on there. But I would assume there's also a volume aspect in pooling and things like that with it. But we're talking rate overall. You can overwhelm it in 3 hours, you can overwhelm it in 6 hours, but you have to have a definition for a 10-year storm 25-year storm, 100-year storm.
Yeah, I think the key that I wanted to point out is if we went from just the 10 to the 25, if that was it, we're really only increasing from 5.5 inches to 6.5 inches over a day. So it's not that, it is not a 2.5 times the rainfall amount. So that's all I wanted to point out with that. And these guys will get into some recommendations with that as well. But I don't believe, based on my experience, the fact that our stormwater ponds are in subdivisions, newer subdivisions and commercial developments, the fact that they are designed for the 10-year storm event, it's not really a big problem. I mean, I can't think of one where somebody has said, boy, that thing needs to be bigger. If it was just bigger and could hold a 25-year storm event, it would solve everything. That's not the issue. The issue is the 3 inches in an hour that we get that just overwhelms.
Can I make another observation, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that there's a notion among a lot of folks in our community that what they're observing over the last several years is this perception that, you know, we're having more 10-year storm events because the climate's changing, right? Well, if the climate is in fact changing, then so is the 10-year storm event. The standard will change.
Well, and Jeff, to that point, if 3 inches in an hour is a 10-year storm, that means every 10 years you should see the 3 inches in an hour. And it makes, and you wonder, NOAA can't change their table every month. They can't change it every year. And I don't know how often they do change it, but I'm guessing they do change it to reflect averages over a previous period of time. So just because you have 3 inches in an hour that might be a 10-year storm event, you don't go changing everything because of that, because it all over a period of time, whatever period of time NOAA uses, that table reflects those fluctuations. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, you made the reference of, you know, you should have one every 10 years. To Mike's point, maybe, maybe not. I mean, what it means is you got a 10% chance every year. And sometimes you might get one of those 4 years in a row.
And you might, and then fast forward another 5 years, you might get none. You remember,
Yeah,
I mean, we
that's
had a
right,
drought
yeah.
here, what years, when we had no rain.
Yeah.
So, you know, I hate to keep referring to pine wild, but in these heavy rain years is when you get all the complaints. And obviously in the drought years, you don't.
But the point I was trying to make is that if in fact the climate is changing, then so will the 10-year storm event
Exactly.
definition, which will keep up with it. So,
And that's what
Yeah.
that's my point with that table.
Yeah.
It will evolve over time, reflecting.
The thing too is you use that same rainfall amount in your pre and your post. So if the storm changes, you're still, if the storm goes up, all you're doing is it's going to increase on your pre-development analysis and it's going to increase on your post-development analysis. So you're still using the same number for both of those analysis. And just for the record, 1 hour, a 10-year storm, the amount of rain we should get in 1 hour is 2.54 inches. So we very well could have gotten that Sunday.
That's a 10-year storm.
Mike, is there any reason we couldn't switch to an hourly definition rather than the 24-hour definition? If that's in fact what generates the problems?
Potentially, yes. I'm going to leave that for our consultant to talk about here in a minute. But yes, I think so. I mean, that's something we have talked about. We've also, well, I don't want to steal his thunder. Let me get to.
Let's let Mike carry on through his presentation here so we can anticipate some of these other questions.
Sure. I do want to note, too, there is also a storm drainage policy and procedures document that was approved by council in 2004. And it says a few things in there I just thought I wanted to point out. One says, yard flooding is a necessary part of storm drainage events. Some people don't like to hear that, but that's what it says.
Yard flooding is a necessary part of storm explain that.
When it rains, your yard might flood. That's the way I interpret it. It's
I think
necessary.
we're allowing overdevelopment. Where does all this water go? When we have additional development, infill and everything?
It goes downhill.
It'd be less and less pervious surface, and so that means that there's less opportunity for water that falls to sink into the ground, so there's going to be more surface water rattling around. Where does it go?
It depends on the topography and the area.
See, that's not good.
Well, over in the lake area, it eventually makes it to the lake. That's where it goes. Or it goes to the nearest creek, or it goes to the stream, and eventually it goes to the Atlantic Ocean. I mean, it goes downstream. It's going to go downhill.
Part of this bullet is a recognition of the fact that what we ultimately want is for it not to make it out to the streams.
And
We
this is
want
a,
it to, we would prefer for it to pool in our yards and infiltrate.
and this is a point you raised several years ago that I never thought about. It goes down to the aquifer.
Yeah.
And if you divert it everywhere, your aquifer suffers.
Right. If you take the approach of trying to, put in all kinds of stormwater infrastructure to get it out to drainage systems, ultimately it winds up in the ocean,
Yeah.
right? And our source of drinking water suffers.
I guess the phrase yard flooding is a necessary part of storm drainage events is something we might want to improve upon. I think
I concur. I think yard flooding may occur as storm drainage events,
Yeah.
but semantics at this point in time.
The
I'd say
other,
let's move on.
sure. The other two things I just wanted to point out, it does say in there, the village seeks to improve drainage only when there is a demonstrable, I think is how you say that word, demonstrable benefit to public property. So, when we get a complaint that, oh, my house is flooding, well, that's not a benefit to public property. Now, if our road is flooding, yeah, we're gonna do something about it. If our right-of-way is flooding, but again, it's gonna flow downhill, and if it's on somebody's property, that is for them to address. We do have the ability in that policy to potentially participate in improvements on private property with a village's share not to exceed 50%. So what that means is if somebody says, I've got a problem here, but there's also a public benefit to it, we can cost share with them 50-50. We have not done that since I've been here. I don't know if I can't remember the last time that's been done.
that might be an interesting aspect for more of our residents to be aware of. Yeah, because
Sure.
that offsets
Been
the
here.
yard flooding is a necessary part of storm drainage events. It's a good cop, bad cop situation with our standards.
And I'll add one more thing. It's been such a learning experience for me, and I think Stephen later pointed this out to me. A lot of people move here from states where every ounce of stormwater is managed. I know in California, it went from the roof to the drainage pipes into the ground and all that, but people come here with that expectation, but in North Carolina, that's not how stormwater is treated, and it's a real education to some people who expect more than what North Carolina requires.
So.
I know,
yeah.
people, I'm blown away by, we're doing nothing.
I wouldn't say we're doing nothing, but
We're making efforts.
And what about water quality? What about treating, water that comes off roofs and driveways is dirty? I mean, do we clean it at all? Do we worry about water that's heated because it comes off of, hot roof or whatever before it goes into the lake? I mean, I don't deal with any of that stuff.
we do not. We do not deal with heated water.
Again,
But where do they clean the water?
What about changing the direction of flow?
What
Because
community
somebody
cleans
just
the water
changed-
that comes off your roof?
What?
What community cleans the water that comes off your roof?
California.
You have a little trap situation, and it cleans out the water. It allows the water to settle,
if-
and
Not
so the
Connecticut.
bud settles out of it.
If we get the result we actually are looking for, which is infiltration cleans the water. The natural process.
Folks, we're not all water engineers here. Let's let these guys get this done. It's very interesting. We're all fascinated by it, but let's get this ongoing.
I'll get through the rest of these quickly. So just some other standards that are out there. DEQ, the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, they do have a stormwater design manual. So for the SCMs, the stormwater control measures, our documents reference that. They're supposed to be designed in accordance with their minimum design criteria. Of course, the Pinehurst Development Ordinance does have some stormwater references in it. It's pretty light because most of that falls on the engineering standards manual. We do have a flood damage prevention ordinance that talks about development within the floodplain. I know Darren's group deals with that some, but we really don't have a whole lot of designated floodplains here. And then any site that disturbs more than an acre is required to go to the state for an erosion control permit, and they issue a general stormwater permit as well, but less than an acre does not go to the state, and that's something we've talked about implementing a program here to do that ourselves, but we don't have that in place yet.
And that's one of the things we want to look at, I think, though. The less than an acre, there's a lot of inquiry about that.
But let me just talk about, well, let me first say, I'm an engineer, I'm not an attorney, but I've talked to a lot of attorneys about stormwater law, so this is my interpretation of what the rules in North Carolina say. In 1977, the Supreme Court adopted the rule of reasonable use, which is based on the premise that water naturally flows downhill. The other thing it says is private landowners have the legal right to make reasonable use of their land, and the person on the lower estate must receive and pass water from the higher estate. And any disputes on that typically are resolved in civil court actions. So those are typically not something we get involved in. If somebody builds a house, at least right now, somebody builds a house and they're dumping water on the next person down, that's between two private landowners. And unless the person who built their house does something unreasonable, the person on the lower estate is required to receive and pass water from the higher estate. There's a couple of other rules, just the general statutes that prohibit, there's two general statutes that prohibit the blockage of streams, drainage ways, and easements that move water from higher elevations to lower elevations. So if my neighbor's pushing water on me and I dam that up, I'm in violation of that general statute if I dam it up and push it back on him. That statute actually says it may, and I put that in quotes because that's what it says, it may be enforced by law enforcement officers or the county engineer. That's what it says. There is also a general statute that talks about, I'm not sure I fully understand this one, but it talks about private property. Programs shall not require private property owners to install new or increased stormwater controls for pre-existing development or redevelopment that do not remove or decrease existing stormwater controls. I think what that's trying to say is we can't go into somebody that's already developed and require them to add stormwater controls to their facility. And if they do redevelopment and don't increase impervious, we can't do that either. That's my interpretation of that. So a couple of things I just want to show you. These are ways that, these are SCM, stormwater control measures of the ways that people are complying with standards. This is actually the underground system that is being installed in the sand lot downtown. So the lot on the Village Green has a chamber infiltration system beneath it. It's encased in stone, and it's worked very well for that area. That is one way to do that. This is another way, a dry detention pond. This is actually the new parking lot at Cannon Park. That is, there was a parking lot there. There's this Rattlesnake Trail on the right-hand side, and the water comes off of that and goes into this low-lying area. Pinehurst Coins has a dry detention pond down in Trotter Hills. They have some really permeable soils down there, and so the water just comes in here and infiltrates away. To Jeff's point on infiltration, there's no outlet box or anything with that. It goes in there and it infiltrates into the ground. This is the one, this is a residential area, the Royal Oak Townhomes out on Murdochsville Road. Not as good as soils out there, so the water comes into this basin, and then there is an outlet control structure there that kind of slowly brings it in and releases it at a rate that is less than the pre-development runoff rate. A lot of different ways you can do this. There are a lot of different SCMs in the state's manual. We don't dictate which one a property owner has to use or doesn't have to use, but we require that they design it and construct it in accordance with the manual.
Like, didn't you guys tell us that the soil over at Trotter Hills was some of the most permeable that you had seen, and you were surprised at how permeable it was?
The gentleman that did the soils report over there said he had never seen more permeable soils anywhere in North Carolina.
And to me, that says not all soils have the same degree of, I guess, permeability.
No question. Yeah. Even here in the Sandhills. I mean, there are areas that permeate great, and then there's some that do not. So when we talked about some of this stuff a little bit. If we go in and put infrastructure, we put pipes in different areas. Yeah, there's some benefits to that. We can reduce standing water. We eliminate roadside swales. Some people don't like the roadside swales. We have done some projects on Lake Hills going in from Highway 5. There were some swales that were holding water there, and we've piped those. They can reduce the duration of flooding. So yeah, it's capturing that water and getting it off of the surface. But some of the cons for that, it typically does reduce water quality because you're channeling it all to one area where it can cause some erosion. Of course, there's increased maintenance costs with that, increased capital costs with that. And the Aquifer Recharge, Moore County has 17 drinking water wells in Pinehurst. And I think they're looking at adding 2 more at some point. Infiltrating the stormwater into the ground does certainly impact their ability to pull water out of the aquifer. So we want to be mindful of that as well.
Elliott's has a drinking water well. Is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about the county has 17 drinking water wells, public drinking water wells that supply the village's water system. That's one of the sources of it. They also have interconnections with Southern Pines and Aberdeen and Harnett County, but yeah, a lot of our drinking water comes from groundwater.
Groundwater, yeah, wells.
So that leads us to the Stormwater Management Master Plan. So we kind of developed this scope based on some of the things we had heard from the community and from council and staff. But the primary purposes of the plan, what we're trying to do is to identify effective strategies, evaluate funding mechanisms, and guide the future of stormwater management in Pinehurst. We've divided the project into 2 phases. Phase 1 is underway, probably on the tail end of it. You've already approved and seen the contract for that, and these guys have been working on that. That includes kind of reviewing our existing policies, ordinances, regulations. They've gathered some sample ordinances from other communities, compared them to us, and we've talked about the pros and cons of implementation of those into the village of Pinehurst. We asked them to review our work order tickets through MyVOP to note trends and issues in Pinehurst. We've asked them to review our design storm and return frequency, the 10-year storm. And this goes back to something the mayor said, to review options and potential restrictions for stormwater discharge from existing developed and proposed development lots, Jane, in single-family residential areas. Actually looking at implementing something for those infill lots. And I know Mike's going to talk about that a little bit. Assisting with public engagement, I'll talk about that in just a second. And then also providing recommendations for implementing standards for post-construction maintenance. We did have a public engagement meeting. It's been back in March. Time certainly flies. Kristen was very helpful too in setting up a portal on Engage Pinehurst. We've had 18 people go on there and submit their stormwater concerns, comments. Looked at all of them. Some of them are private property matters. I mean, just be honest. Some of them are, I have flooding in my backyard. There's only so much we can do on some of them. But I'll also say, MyVOP really serves as a 24/7 option for the public to communicate. Engage is still up. People can still go on there and put their comments in, but I just assume them submit something in MyVOP so we can look at it quicker. This is what's in Engage. There's a thing that says, where are your stormwater concerns? And you can actually put a raindrop. Kristen came up with that idea. Put a raindrop on that area and describe your problem. So that's been another option for people to note their problems. So we're going to be moving into phase 2 soon. With that, I want them to, what I'm asking them to do is to assist with solutions. We've got some problem areas that we know about from complaints from citizens and things that we have seen. So look at some of those areas and help us determine what we want to do there. And then really project our future funding needs. We have $385,000 in the budget this year. Is that sustainable? Should we keep doing that? Do we need to ask for more money? And if we get to a point where it's going to cost a lot more money to do what you all want to do, is a stormwater utility feasible or desirable. That is a separate enterprise fund. It is a revenue source where the residents and potentially businesses are assessed a fee to be determined, whether that's a monthly fee, an annual fee, and there are a lot of municipalities that do that. There are a lot that don't do that. But it may be a potential revenue source to do more things. And then we want to evaluate the advantages, disadvantages, and feasibility of establishing our own delegated erosion control program in lieu of using the state for these services. So that'll be coming up in phase 2 very, very soon. Our deliverables, we're going to have a final written document that summarizes all this stuff, and then another presentation will be made to council. So like I said, this is not the only time you will see this. Love the initial feedback that we're getting on it, and there'll certainly be more opportunities to do that.
One quick suggestion.
Sure.
On that stormwater utility, it'd be helpful to know the size of communities that have such a thing and how long they've had them, how many are there? Are they, unicorns, or we find out that there's dozens of them in
Sure.
state? Just,
There's
it's
actually,
an interesting concept.
there's a dashboard that shows that. I want to say the state actually put together, I might send you the link on that.
Please.
There's a dashboard that shows, and it's got everybody listed and what that
UNC
is.
School of Government.
Yeah.
And they do a survey annually. They identify all of the utilities stormwater utilities within the state, and they have a myriad of different things that they survey on so that you can make comparison contrast between different types of regulated elements within their stormwater utility, how they're funded, what their funding levels are, whether or not they have one fee or multiple fees, a variety of different things.
Thanks. I'll look forward to that. I'm trying to learn something.
Okay. That's all I have for now. I'm going to turn it over to Michael, just with some kind of preliminary recommendations. Again, these are not final, and these are certainly subject to change. But if you want to talk through that and talk through anything else
I'll let
you've
you
heard
deal with
tonight.
that.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
fine. Yeah, it's a little finicky.
So I guess to talk about our recommendations, we have talked with staff. We've looked at the public input and feedback that was provided at our public meeting. As Mike mentioned, we have benchmark communities. Some of those communities had NPDES MS4 permits, others did not. Some of them had stormwater utilities already in place, others did not. We wanted to try and get a good cross-section of different types of communities to compare Pinehurst to, being that you are considering moving in the direction of a stormwater utility. Also, you have in the past been potentially brought into an MS4 scenario, and that was sidestepped at the time. That may be part of your future as the regulations for MS4 communities continue to change and they bring in more and more communities into that program.
Can I talk about that for a second? Let me talk about that for a minute. So just to make sure you understand what that is, back in 2013, I believe it is, the village received a letter from the state that said, you're being considered for being entered into this NPDES Phase 2 program, whereby the state kind of comes in and regulates your stormwater program.
They dictate minimum standards that you have to follow.
And so I think there's 6 different standards that you have to follow with that, but it's a pretty significant thing. I worked as a consultant at the time and served as the village engineer and worked with Jeff Batten. We actually met with the state and told them all of the things that the village was doing with regards to stormwater, the stuff that was in the PDO, the stuff that was in the engineering standards manual. And at that time, they said, you know what? We think you guys are good. You're doing enough. So we're not going to oversee your program there. So that was 2013. So a lot of the benchmark communities that Michael's talking about, they're required. They weren't so lucky. They have the state overlooking them, and I know the state's been auditing a lot of them lately and
Yes.
coming down pretty hard on them as well, right? From
Yeah,
what I have heard.
You have as part of an MS4 community to the state, and recognize that the NPDES program flows down to the state from the feds. So it's an EPA rule under clean water management and the Clean Water Act, and then moving down to the state. The state was delegated authority to oversee the program within North Carolina. So those communities that are brought in are given these 6 minimum standards that they must meet in their program. And some of those are based on communication to the public. Some of those are based on how the program is run from maintenance and an oversight standpoint. And some of them are focused on water quality, one of the questions that came up earlier tonight. Those regulations are not currently in place for the village. But it may be something that what we've seen in the past is a trend that moved from communities that were 1 million people or more, and that was the first tranche, phase 1. Then they moved down to communities that were 500,000 or more when they moved into phase 2. They moved down to communities that were 100,000 and more. And then the latest one that brought in a lot of smaller communities was they looked at aggregate sizes. So they went to an area and they looked at the aggregate population in that area of combined communities. And they said, as an aggregate, you now fall in under this threshold. So all of the communities within this area are all brought into the program. I expect that that's going to continue to move. You know, when that's going to occur is hard to say, but they're likely going to continue to move that to a smaller group in size, a larger aggregate area, to try and bring in more and more of the populated areas in under water quality controls.
So what kind of practices get you in trouble?
It isn't a matter of getting in trouble. It's
What
a matter of if you qualify under the current standard, either you're in or you're out.
But I think
You
if what you're
aren't
asking,
brought in because you've done something wrong, I guess. My
Well,
point.
how do we avoid having somebody come in and tell us how we need to do things? And
9 years ago, we told them what all we were doing, and they said, okay, you're good. So that's what happened in 2013.
But now, if they're going to be pooling communities and we do everything right, but others in our pool are not, then we could be dragged into it because we're doing things right and others in
You
our
could,
pool.
and I think you're doing what are referred to as higher standards. The 10-year storm right now is what you regulate to. The state standard is a 1-year storm. So you are regulating at a higher level, and that was one of the things that they gave credence to before when they said, you're doing enough, you're doing beyond what the minimum requirement would be, therefore we're going to leave you alone. Maybe that will be enough to leave you in the standard you are in. You don't have a lot of other populated areas that are densely populated surrounding you that are likely going to suddenly fall into this envelope unless the envelope changes dramatically. And we don't know if that's going to be, 10 years or 30 years from now that might change.
But then if that's a possibility, if it's a long-term possibility, maybe no big deal, but if it's a shorter-term possibility, it doesn't need further discussion right now, but is it worth our while to work with neighboring communities just to elevate the standard of how we do this, so to keep ourselves out of that falling into being monitored? I don't.
Let's keep going on these recommendations here.
So on the standards, we've talked about the benchmark communities, recommendations related to the benchmark communities and looking at the different standards that are currently applied within those communities. We are not recommending that the village move in the direction of including water quality criteria at this time. We are also not recommending that you look to change your buffer rules at this time. So that's the area around a stream that's regulated for no development, no clearing within that zone. And it's primarily the reason we're not making those recommendations is there isn't anything that's compelling you to move in that direction at this time. Those changes in the program to add those types of regulations in are going to cost you money. You're going to have to add staff to do that. So we're trying to balance what are the things that are causing your problems that you're hearing from your citizens and from staff, and how do we address those issues with changes in the regulations and ordinances. But we don't just bring in other things as a blanket to say this is a good idea, let's add it in. So that's why we did not move in recommendation of those two. We do recommend implementing specific SCM maintenance inspection guidelines. So that goes back to one of the previous comments on an SCM, a stormwater control measure, a pond, an underground vault. Right now, as Mike mentioned, there's a reference to you have to maintain your own, but they don't say how. Right now, your ordinance is moot to that. So you're left with, if they are not maintaining their system, how do you go in and try and enforce that? You don't have any enforcement mechanisms, those types of things in your ordinance right now. Those are things that we're suggesting would be beneficial to be able to maintain and control that into the future. We recommend creating a stormwater development manual. We referenced, and we've looked through all of the different manuals that you currently have, and one of the reasons why we're recommending the Stormwater Development Manual is that it would give a way to consolidate all of those different manuals into one source, one guide that would be a one-stop source for anyone who wants to do development in your community to be able to go to and find out all the information they need to know about how stormwater is regulated in your community. It would also give you an opportunity to represent some of your policies and some of the other decisions that council has made in that same document, so that it's a way to communicate to the community as a whole what your standards are and what your provisions are for how you want to regulate stormwater. As we move forward, next slide, we're recommending on the pre-post discharge criteria, right now your 10-year standard, 10-year 24-hour, as Mike mentioned. We recommended moving in the direction of adding a 2-year and a 25-year. Happy to go into a whole lot more detail on this, but bring it down to very simple point for the lateness of the hour. There was a question about regulating the flow of water off of a site and what that does to your downstream communities. As you move in the direction of adding not just a single point where you're comparing that discharge, but you look at comparing a lower point of discharge and a higher point of discharge, you have the ability to match that pre-development curve better. I'm not matching it at 1 point, I'm now matching it at 3 points. So the change in the discharge going to your downstream properties becomes less evident. You have more volume because you're generating, you have more impervious area, you're having more water run off, but you're regulating the discharge at multiple points now. That is one standard that is in place at several communities across the state. It's been a positive response that they've gotten as they've implemented that type of approach, and they've had less complaints related to, now suddenly I'm getting more water flowing at me, because the rate of water is not changing for the perceptible storms that they're seeing. It's the volume that's changing, that's now controlled, that's discharging downstream. It's causing less of a problem for them. So I'm happy to go into more detail, but we'll leave it at that for right now. Or maybe we won't. Oh, no.
Back. Yeah, it's not. There we go.
Okay. No.
This thing, we gotta get this. Go ahead and, there we go.
All right, so pre-post residential development, that's another question that came up. Certainly that was something that was brought forward from staff as a continuing problem. Some of the recommendations that we think would be beneficial to address this issue is to bring in a standard for development that identifies when you have a certain exceedance of your existing impervious area. So Mike mentioned state code says if I have development or redevelopment of the same size that was there before, I can't cause you to do anything more than what was already there. But they don't say anything about adding additional, what we refer to as built upon area, additional impervious area. So if I'm going to have a lot and I'm going to go from a 2,000 square foot home to a 4,000 square foot home, I'm going to generate a significant amount of additional runoff to my neighbors. And that, what we're recommending is that that would be a trigger. And if 2,000 square feet is an example that we could present, it could certainly be something less than that. If the council decided to move in that direction. For single family lot development, to say, if you have this additional amount of impervious area, you have to come in, meet with village staff, talk to them about what measures you are doing related to your stormwater controls, how you're discharging off the site. Are you concentrating your discharge where it was sheet flow before? Are you catching your roof drains and allowing that to bleed out over time? Or are you discharging it directly off the edge of your site onto your neighbor and into his pool, or whatever the case may be? It allows staff to do more than what you currently have the capacity to do within your current ordinance, to at least understand what measures are being taken. And if chosen to do so, you could also implement certain restrictions on what you're allowing them to do. We also had recommended going in the direction of developing an operations and maintenance agreement. Many communities have this, especially the ones with MS4 requirements. And that has to do with the stormwater control measures that are put in by developments. If you have an operations and maintenance agreement with them, then you would have the ability to regulate how that is maintained.
And
They would
so-
have-
So that is an agreement between the developer or the POA, whoever, I guess it'd originally be by
Yeah,
the
it would
developer, and then it would go over
transfer
to the POA and the village, between the developer,
Correct.
saying they are going to, saying what they are going to do to maintain it, and if they do not maintain it, here's the specific
Correct.
actions that will be taken.
And also establishing stormwater control measure inspection criteria. So what is it that we want you to do inspections for? Are we going to do it, the village? Are we going to do that inspection? Or are you, the property owner, POA, going to do that inspection and report back to us? Typically, communities are looking for the property owners in their O&M agreements to have annual inspections done by a qualified professional that is then turned back to the village to say, yes, this has been inspected, it's operating properly, check the box, we're good to go. That's the inspection. Frequency is annually, biannually, whatever we choose to make it, and then enforcement mechanisms can also be tied to that. If you're not inspecting, or your facility is not operating correctly and it's overgrown and it's filled with sediment, right now, the village doesn't have the ability to go in and force you to do anything to correct those actions. And you're relying on the state to do that, which typically they don't, unless there's a huge problem. So we're recommending that you move in the direction of implementing these control measures to give you more authority to be able to implement these things and better control how these things operate in your community.
All four of those seem like reasonable routes. Question for you, though. How did you come up with 2,000 square feet versus 1,800 square feet versus 2,200?
So I use an example of 2,000 as something that is typical. Typically, your single-family homes are between 1,800 and 2,500 square feet. And if you are looking at trying to regulate something that's a significant change, so going from a single-family home to a mega mansion on a site, those are usually the ones that are causing the biggest problem. And as I said before, that number can slide up or down a scale. We're representing the 2,000 square feet as an example.
Okay.
You certainly could use something that was 1,200 or 1,500 square feet as a different threshold.
What's BUA?
Built upon area, it's the same thing as impervious area. It is an area that was previously grass, and you now have some built element on it, whether it be a driveway or a rooftop.
Thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
This is your last one for recommendations.
All right, and then develop proactive inlet swale and pipe cleaning program. Right now, I think the program that is in place is reactive. If there's a problem, we'll go out and deal with it. If you want to get ahead of your next storm, having a proactive inlet swale pipe cleaning program can help you do that to avoid the problems from happening rather than having to respond to the issues once they arise.
Let me address that a little bit too. We've gotten more proactive since I've gotten here, but we're still not where we want to be. And one of the things that we asked them to do was look at trends. We talked about the scope of work, look at trends in my VOP. There's a section in their report that talks about keywords in my VOP and how many times stuff showed up, I think over a 3 or 4 year period. And the word clean was in there way more than anything else. And so that kind of told me, all right, we still need to be going in there cleaning pipes, cleaning ditches, cleaning that kind of stuff. So we have some, we still have some improvement to do on that front. And so like Mike said, not wait for the MyVOP to come in to say, hey, you need to clean this out. Let's go ahead and get ahead of that and develop something where we're cleaning some sort of percentage every year. I don't know what that looks like. But anyway, I'm definitely supportive of that recommendation.
And then the last item that we wanted to make sure was addressed is that the inclusion of increased ordinances, increased maintenance, increased operations and oversight always comes with the cost. And that cost is typically in funding additional staff positions. So we have on here right now a recommendation for 1 additional staff to be added to the crew that you currently have, and whether or not that staff position is a field position or that staff position is an office position is going to be dictated by, and whether or not 1 is enough or we need to go in the direction of doing more than 1, it's going to be dictated by the acceptance of the recommendations. If all the recommendations are accepted as they stand, 1 staff position is probably going to be enough. If we move in the direction of doing something that's beyond what we've currently recommended, then we may be looking at 2 staff positions. And then you're looking at, how do you fund those? That's part of our phase 2 is those funded positions, what do they cost you annually? And does that make you want to start looking at a stormwater utility for that purpose?
So just next steps, we need to get their contract revised to include phase 2. I'm working on that. Of course, we need to complete the project and present the full document to you. I'd like to get this done by the end of the calendar year, because if we are talking about staffing changes, if we're talking about additional funding requests and all that, that's kind of the start of the FY24 budget request. So we're going to try to go hard at this in the next few months and hopefully be back in front of you soon with that. But those are kind of our next steps of where we need to go from here. I know that's a lot of information. It was a lot of good feedback. We're here to answer questions. If you want to provide more feedback now, that's great. If you want to think about it and send it via email, that's fine too. These guys, their email addresses are up there as well. So that's the end of our formal presentation.
Mike, I would only ask, do you concur with all these recommendations?
I do.
You're part of that process, obviously.
Part of that process, yes.
Okay, all right. Any questions from council for Mike or Michael?
No, only thing I'd like to do is I'd like to share this with the Neighborhood Advisory Committee. So
Yes,
that
we
we
could do
get
something
some
like that.
feedback from all the neighborhoods and see if, how this strikes a chord or not. And I'd like a little time to digest it.
Great.
But I'm impressed with the thought that went into this. Well done.
And when would we see the contract then? What's the timing on that?
By the end of the year?
Fiscal year?
I
or
hope so.
calendar
Yeah.
year?
Yeah, this
Calendar year, I
yes.
think you're saying, yeah.
That's correct.
Okay. Good.
I have one
That's a
question.
heck of an update on a lot of complicated issues we get questions about all the time.
Does the village require construction fences for new development? I'm asking that because we've seen situations where you've got a construction fence and then you've got the 3 inches in an hour and everything blows through the construction fence, and that causes a lot of complaints.
Correct. We do. You're referring to the silt fence, right? Like the black silt fence that is up there? Yes. Now, our engineering standards manual talks about meeting state regulations for erosion control, and I believe the PDO does too, as far as the single family. So yes, silt fence is like at a minimum what people should be doing for that.
And if there's a problem, is the contractor responsible to come back and clean up the mess and put the fence back in place?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So a key point, though, that was brought up earlier, currently you do not have oversight, regulatory oversight over your erosion sediment control. That's one of the things that we were going to be looking at in our phase 2 of this program, is whether or not that makes sense for the village to have local oversight and more control over what occurs.
Aren't we obligated to have a qualified engineer on staff in order to do that?
Yes, there's a variety of different things that you need to meet. The state has standards that have to be dealt with, and we can bring those forward as part of our phase 2.
And just to be clear, if we did do that, we would probably be looking at more than one staff person for that, because that would probably be a full-time job in itself, overseeing erosion control in the village.
And there are many communities across the state that have that delegated authority.
Southern Pines does.
Correct.
So some of this is going to go through the regular budget review process and the justification of that. Fine. Good. Okay. I think we're all set then. Michael, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your time.
Let's try to move on here. Bringing up item number 5, nuisance lighting regulations, right?
John, it's getting kind of late. I would recommend you move on to 6 and 7. That makes sense?
Well, I'm gonna object. I
You have somebody here, I understand.
one person left in this audience who came here over the lighting issue.
Let's do the lighting.
Let's do the lighting. I don't think it's too controversial.
Okay, we may want to look at the rest of the agenda then and abridge it accordingly.
All right. See if this thing works. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. So most recently, we over the period of many years, we've off and on, we've occasionally heard complaints from residents about various types of lighting nuisances. What they historically have been something more along the lines of, my neighbor always uses floodlights and they don't point them down at the ground, they kind of point them out, and it's, it's bleeding over into our property. We historically have not attempted to try to regulate this, and part of it is defining, what is and is not an infraction, if you will. And then, okay, what do we do? But how do we enforce it? We don't have a nighttime staff to go out and assess these type of situations. And it came up so infrequently that it just didn't seem like the juice was worth the squeeze there. More recently, we've had this complaint about a lighted display, if you will, on a private piece, on a private property parcel that is impacting some of the neighbors. Very bright. And so we looked at this question again, and so what I've done is try to take a stab at a way to address the concern within the framework of what we can and can't do legally, regulating things that we call nuisances, and where I fit this in was in Chapter 92 of our municipal code under the pollutants and noise control section. Adopted a similar framework that we use regarding most of our similar nuisance type situations, whereby we said that it's a nuisance because it's impacting the ability of people to sleep. And so that's where we used, the overnight hours that are common to the other requirements that we have in our municipal code, but with noise and things like that as well. So this is a first stab. I'm sure that you all have recommendations on other things you might want to do along that lines. Let me grab my pen.
This was brought to our attention, certainly surprised me from a resident, and as opposed to thinking it was just one resident, he went out and he got a petition signed by 13 neighbors. So it was a bigger problem than, just I'm having a problem with one neighbor.
Yeah, I mean, from all indications are, it really is kind of bothersome, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And unbeknownst to me, but staff said, we really haven't addressed this. It's not in our ordinance, what we can do with this. And
Yeah.
so it's one of those things, who would have thought? So I think this is pretty good. The only comment that I would make is that there's a question as to whether or not time is the exact right. I understand what Jeff just said, because that coincides with other things where we pick a time period.
Yeah, no.
I think to some folks, the question is the illumination factor. Is it, I'm throwing this out. It's like the noise factor when people going around with the app now and can tell you what's the decibel.
That's where, I mean, the enforceability part of this thing is challenging.
Yeah.
And I tried to think along those lines and try to wrap my brain around how we could, okay, you could try to do the, the lumens across lot line thing, but,
Yeah.
so so what are we going to do now? So we're going to hire staff to go out and, with lumen detectors to walk around at night and do this? Or can we try to use a similar approach to it we have done with some other things and lay this requirement on our police department? And that's ultimately
Yeah.
the-
That's a good point about
so,
enforcement.
I mean,
Enforcement, the
our
time thing's easy to
police
enforce.
officers are now carrying noise meters, and so now, I mean, they're
Probably
not,
light meters
they're not
out
really
there.
trained to do any of this stuff, but,
Yeah.
so we tried to come back to what really makes it a nuisance. It's really a nuisance if people can't sleep. Because you have all this ambient light coming through their windows, and, and some people might argue, well, then just buy better blinds or whatever, but, I mean, it still is, you shouldn't be imposing on your neighbors.
Is
like
10
that.
o'clock correspond to our noise number? I don't know why I thought might have been 9, or it's 10?
We use 10 to 7 for recreational activity, and, yeah, so it's,
Why don't we say 7 a.m. instead of
10 to
6 a.m.?
7 on Sundays and holidays. So it's not exactly the same. I mean, in these hours, I mean, we could talk
flexible.
about modifying them.
Okay.
I'd like to see it be dawn to dusk,
That's too ambiguous.
dawn to dusk,
That's,
or dusk to dawn, or
that's
whatever.
way too
I
ambiguous.
mean, it's a different time every day by definition. I don't,
Yeah. But how about 7 a.m. instead of 6 a.m.? 6 is still dark and people still asleep. It's funny, as I thought about this, when we all grew up, we had what? We had a light on the front porch.
yeah.
But now
And
people are
We
moving
do use 7
in.
a.m. in a lot of different things here, so.
But now people have the security lights and the lights in the front yard, so I think this is much needed based on just the proliferation of lights over the past 10, 15, 20 years. So I like what you've done here. I'd only extend it from 10 p.m. to, extend it to 7 a.m. because it's still dark at 6 in most of the year.
Yeah.
But Jeff, I think you were looking for some direction, and I believe you were doing some additional research on this anyway, leading up to tonight. You hear you talking about decorative lights, or, like seasonal lights? Because I've seen and heard across the
Christmas
country
lights, sorry.
of, people decorating their house for Christmas in July and Halloween at Easter time or something. And
Yeah.
I don't know how we would deal with that, or if the council would even want to, but
The
this
way I
is
tried
certainly
to
a good
deal with
start.
that was in the last specification where it says, so what would be exempt is
Yes.
holiday
Decorations.
decorations during the period of November 15th to January 10th.
That's an
Those
exception.
dates might, they might
Right.
be the right answer, or something slightly different might be the answer, but this allows people to celebrate the holidays like they always have
Right.
within reasonable limits, right?
What's reasonable?
Yeah, well,
And
Ask the
moreover,
beautification committee.
we're Christmas shopping in June now, so, yeah.
And, yeah, I think this is a great first draft to address this issue. And if you
Okay.
can come up with a little more information, we can
What I'll do then is I'll kind of tighten this up again, and I'll bring it back to you for consideration at the next regular meeting. If you choose to adopt it at that time with or without modifications, then okay. Or if you just want me to go back and make, other changes and bring it back, then we can move
But
this along.
by that time, citizens will have enough chance to have reviewed this. If they have some
Yeah.
clever idea, we can include that.
Yeah.
But we know of this one really significant problem, but like Lydia mentioned it, there's more lights out there now.
Yeah.
So it may be happening elsewhere, and people are just, it's not that
I
drastic.
really tried to think thoughtfully about the things that people really would feel strongly about making sure there's an exemption from. Things that, for example, the security lights and floodlights, as long as they're pointed, generally toward the ground, and, things that people get genuinely nervous about. But there may be other examples that people come up with that we should consider to exempt, or maybe modify these in some other way,
But no question, the council believes this is something we want to deal with, and this is a good start.
I
See what
concur.
that- Okay,
well, that was easier than I thought.
all right.
Did a good job.
All right. You're up, Darren.
I don't have anything for the moratorium. I guess I do have something for moratorium. Yeah, good job, Kelly. Thank you. As many of you know, we've had both the small area plan areas under a moratorium for probably, about a year and a half. There's the original ordinance there, 2204. Oh, no, that's the most latest one. The original one was 2201, then we went 2215, 2103, then 2204. That ordinance is currently, the moratorium would expire on October 9th, I believe it is. 6th? Okay, October 6th. So what we've done is we've started the public hearing process. We've done a notified public hearing process for the 27th, just to get the ball rolling. We didn't have a meeting last month, so we couldn't talk to you about this. So you're going to be faced with the decision on September 27th, whether we extend the moratorium or not. From a staff perspective, where we are on the project, where we are, at least on the two plans. The Village Place plan has been approved. Pioneer South, I'm hoping that we're getting close on that. That was the original goal, was to get through those two plans. As far as the codes and the code updates, we're working on the code updates. Based on experience with bringing codes through, I don't know how long it's going to take anymore. We're Planning and Zoning Board is trying. We're meeting this Thursday to talk about Village Place. I think I'll be able to get some general consensus through that group, and then some point it would bubble up to you. I just don't have a time frame on it. I just don't know. I've lost some time just because of short-term rental has taken a lot of time off my plate. So just things like that. So I don't have a crystal ball how long it's going to take anymore. I just don't. So it could take a year. I just don't know. So I'm not even making it. I think the ordinance itself that we noticed was Kelly, 120 days, I believe. That's it. I just don't know whether you want to extend it or not, because I can't give you a time frame on when we're going to get the form-based codes approved. Now we do have we've got the Village Place plan approved. We've got the Pioneer South in a good place. So I feel good from those two perspectives. If the moratorium lifts, we have the plans to continue to act as a guide and we'll continue to work on the code updates through that time period. But again, I can't tell you how long it's going to take.
I think we still need to consider extending the moratorium. That's kind of where my mind is. Is that one of the reasons I know you're putting a lot of, you're not sure out there, and we understand that.
That's why, that's my main source of concern. I don't know how long this is going to take and to create, adding another 120 days, that really, I mean, we're going to be at 2 years pretty soon that we've had those areas locked down.
Do we put ourselves at any legal risk?
We do. I mean, the legal risk is, you're supposed to be moving on these rather expeditiously. So that's what, if somebody challenges in court, they'll look at what we've been doing at the local level to try and alleviate the original condition, the concern that we raised when we created the original ordinance. So they would look at something like that, but haven't been through the process.
That's what I thought the answer was. And I would prefer to have a opinion from Mike Newman on this one, to tell the truth. Are we putting ourselves at risk by continuing the moratorium, yes or no? Because as you said, it's 2 years. And that seems like an unreasonable amount of time to me. I concur with what John said. Overall, we try to put the moratorium so we can end up controlling the growth on here. But right now we're stopping the growth. And at some point in time, that's not going to be viewed as appropriate or legal.
I would prefer we end it, but I don't think, I don't think there's been any intentionality on staff or anyone else to drag these things out. It's a challenging issue, as we've found. We've already approved one plan, the Village Place, and we're getting much closer. And you are already in progress. I've attended some of those, one of those meetings on the Planning and Zoning Board on the issue of form-based codes. And I agree with your, I'll say, conclusion that you don't know how long it'll take. I think, though, the 4-month extension is probably wise, because I think you'll probably accomplish a lot more in those 4 months. Vis-a-vis, we'll be done with our work on the plans. You will have progressed probably a great bit more on the form-based codes.
Correct.
So there'll be a lot more clarity on this. So I'd be supportive of a 4-month extension.
You said 4-month extension.
Yeah, that's what was
from
asked
where
in the
we are.
memo. Yeah,
Okay.
100, I'm sorry, well, I think you used 120 days. Yeah.
Whatever it is,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that,
120 days.
Well, we're going to press, we would press on regardless.
Yeah.
It's something that needs to get done. We're going to do it. It's just the concerns that we've had of over locking those areas down. Still, I mean,
Let me-
if I,
let me ask one other question. If we lifted it, are the people who are working on the form-based codes now in your staff, are they going to be distracted, shall we say, in a nice way, to what will change because of a lifted moratorium?
No.
None at all?
No, and it's, on the form-based code, a lot of the actual details, that's Alex and I are hammering through that. Part of the reason why we've been waylaid so much is that we've had some staffing issues. So the nuts and bolts of actually making the ordinance work and how we can adopt it, that's in our hands now. So we're working on that, and that's what we're working through the P&Z with. It won't be a distraction. The one thing that I would say about, even if you lifted the moratorium, if you look at some of those larger parcels, the Mahaley tract down there and the one below that, well, we're not done with the plan yet, but the plan is kind of inspirational. So anybody who wants to really do a development in that area to meet the planning goals is really going to probably have to come in under a conditional zoning, and we could use that plan as part of that analysis with the conditional zoning. There might be a couple parcels in there that, development might happen in Pioneer South. Village Place is a little bit of a different animal, because a lot of that land is in a redevelopment status. So it's going to take a lot of heavy lifting. Public services complex, there's a lot of existing development that needs to be taken care of. There's a lot of parcels that aren't zoned appropriately to meet the vision of the plan. There are a couple of vacant parcels in there. That's the risk. That's one of the risks if something like that happens.
There is one parcel in particular in Village Place that we would be best served, I think, by keeping the moratorium in place.
Well, we can address that. Can I ask Jeff a related question? Is there any further movement on the land in Village Place with Moore County and stuff like that?
The appraisal has not been started yet.
All right, well, I'm just trying to, I know you're working on it, but I've
Yeah.
always said for us to be a real player in that
Just found
Village
out
Place, we need to
yesterday
get
that
that land.
our portion of the bill is going to be $2,500. So hopefully we'll get started here pretty quickly, but
Thank you.
So I'm hearing some direction of continuing the moratorium for 120 days. Jeff Morgan's raised the idea, we'd like to make sure that's clear with Mike Newman.
I haven't decided yet, and to Jeff Morgan's point, I pulled up the required statement, so I'd like Mike Newman to make sure that the ordinance addresses everything in there, because there's some requirements in there that I'm troubled by, but I'm not the attorney.
I believe we've written I think the ordinances as written does, well, from my perspective, meet the requirements that we originally laid down. So basically, we're just extending the original ordinance.
the limits of the moratorium haven't changed, have they?
Not that I'm aware of.
And Mike Newman reviewed the original
Right.
one.
I think part of the question was,
Dr.
there's
Morgan,
there's that other part of the statute about how these things get to court, and I believe there's an expedited judicial review on some of these moratorium cases, and
Yeah,
they might
yeah.
have some standards and
So
criteria.
the question is whether or not we're at risk because we're not moving quickly enough.
That's the
I think
exact
so.
point.
Yeah.
I'm going to propose is we'll send this question to Mike and we'll provide a written response from him to you all.
Thank you.
I think that's good. Okay. I guess you're still up, Darren, with our last item of the night. The idea was that we'd have some informal discussion about where the SDR program is, but the idea also was that if you have a summary that we could be receiving of kind of where the planning board came out, we've all watched it, of course, but what are the loose ends and things we need to drill down on and decide at our next meeting?
I think some of those were some, let me start. We separated out the proposed amendments into various actions. And that was, we wanted to see where we were potentially getting full consensus on some of the issues, just to see where they are versus having them vote on one solid action. So on the recommendation for the permit revocation, that was a 8-0 vote. On the revisions to add I believe for the uses, that was again another unanimous vote. When we got down into the discussion of the special requirements, so the special requirements over the Planning and Zoning Board voted to amend or make recommendations to some of the special requirements. I think one of them was to add one fully operational fire extinguisher. One was to capitalize special events and remove large gatherings because it was hard to do. We don't really define large gatherings at this point. 13E was and this was just some minor modification, modify the first sentence to read, verified violation is a determination made by a code enforcement officer or a judge, period. Following such a determination, notice of violation shall be issued by the village, period. So that was just some minor, there was some legalese that we were looking at those special requirements. And then they voted to add an item 16, and that was a condition to post the rules conspicuously somewhere in the unit. And that is not an uncommon requirement, and I pulled another ordinance where I did find that they have done that, and they've written an effective ordinance, so I can update that. I can certainly update that language as needed. And then lastly was the tricky one. That was where you didn't get consensus, and that was the discussion of what zoning districts it should be allowed in.
Right.
And
Well, there were other loose end that was homestays. They didn't want to deal with
oh,
that.
correct. I forgot about that. Homestays.
That's
yeah.
back to us for however we want to define that. But that's part of the loose ends as you're summarizing there. And then clearly the issue of the zoning districts, where short-term rentals will be allowed and where
Correct.
not. And if I recall correctly, they didn't make any changes to the multifamily mixed use.
No.
That was same as we had put it up.
Correct.
They had differences of opinion on the issues of the single-family neighborhoods and how we would handle it there.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And the homestays, I think, we had spent a lot of time on the short-term rental. So that was 6 hours on that.
Yes.
So I think, they were ready. We didn't want to, I don't think we wanted to have another meeting to hold this to come to you. So, we said we kind of kicked it up. You can always kick it back and we can work session that out at some point. But, it's right now it's back into your hands because they just because of the timing, we just didn't have time to meet again to work that out.
So we need to look at, in specifics, the changes that you just identified to us, the wording and the other
Correct.
things. And I think that then becomes for our next meeting. Now, I'd laid out this idea before that maybe it's going to take 3 meetings or so. It may take 4, I don't know. But I think we would have to start with at the next meeting, subject to how you all see this, with reviewing these changes. And do we want to have a hearing then on those changes, or do we need to discuss that through and then have a hearing, which we would then have come to some agreement on these various wording changes and everything else? So I was questioning my own idea that the hearing is necessary on the 27th, or is that the first meeting of October?
I mean,
What are we having a hearing on? That's what, I can't
No,
figure
we've
out
got
what
to-
we're having a hearing on.
We have to have a hearing on, excuse me, go
we're
ahead.
scheduled now.
Yeah, we already scheduled.
Well, we have it scheduled,
Yes.
Yeah.
but we don't have to have it if we're not ready for it.
Right.
But the hearing that I thought we scheduled was one for the public
Correct.
to come here and give us their opinions.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Opinions on what,
On
though?
the short-term rental.
Same thing you saw at the P and Z meeting. So I think the way you had scheduled it is we're going to have that public hearing,
Yes.
reflect on what you heard in that public hearing, and then come back and potentially talk it over or take action on an ordinance.
In October, all right.
Okay, so.
But still, at the next meeting, you'll have a summary of what you just told us.
Yes.
And we weren't
Yeah.
expecting that tonight, but you were working on it, so that's part of the package for next time.
You'll have the minutes and the motions. I've had my admin has been out sick.
No, I
so-
understand
So
that.
that's part of the issue.
All right. I'm sorry, Lydia, you had a point?
Okay, so our public hearing on the 27th is what are the materials going to be that day? The public needs to be prepared for what we're going to be seeing and they're going to be addressing. So what is going to be considered in the public hearing?
It's going to be the same, it's going to be the same material, but we're going to have to actually have the ordinance
If
written.
you have the public hearing on the 27th, I think what Darren needs to do is to update the actual text amendment
Yeah.
to be reflective of what the Planning and Zoning Board recommended, and then that's what the public will be coming in and commenting on.
So-
Alternately, the other approach I think that John I think was getting at was, you could instead use the 27th to, based on what you heard from the Planning and Zoning Board, decide what you want the updated ordinance text amendment to look like, and then that would be the basis for a public hearing at your next meeting after that.
So we would still have a public hearing. See if I'm stating this correctly. We still would have a public hearing to get the public's input on what P and Z did, but not on a draft ordinance. And then the draft ordinance would come on the 11th, and we would need another public hearing then, no?
You only need one.
That's correct.
To provide the public the opportunity to comment on the subject matter. So I think the question you need to ask yourselves is the community best served to have them come and comment on what the Planning and Zoning Board recommended? Or come and comment on what you guys have kind of figured out what you think is closest to the final solution?
I think it's better for them to comment on what we think is the closest to the final solution. So as we have developed it from the public and, or the planning and zoning and put it out there. I think they input on the final product, basically.
So but we're not there yet, so we wouldn't, the 27th can't be a public hearing on the final product because we don't have it yet.
Correct.
Okay.
It can be,
Yeah,
but
it can be.
But it's just point.
it might be
let's-
better to wait, I
But
guess, yeah.
Okay, now, at what point will we talk to Mike Newman again? I mean, we talked to Mike in closed session about what's allowed and what's not allowed, and to me, this is it's such a, I don't want to say volatile, but it's such a tricky issue that I think it's worth our while to talk to Mike
I
again.
agree. I agree with Lydia. I think we should put that on our closed meeting for next meeting. I don't know, why wait?
So then,
The subject matter is to get,
Just general closed meeting guidance from our council.
from Mike Newman.
Yeah, from Mike
I
Newman.
thought you had said that, but I couldn't hear that. All right.
I think that's what you're saying, right?
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, okay.
Because and I've been wondering at what point do we do that? And so now we're saying, somebody articulate, it's getting late. We won't have the public hearing until the 11th on our finished product. But when do we talk to Mike? Because if we discuss next week what the finished product should be, but then don't talk to Mike until after that meeting, that doesn't seem logical to me.
We've had the discussions with Mike. The ordinance that we've drafted has been drafted. Mike has looked at that ordinance. So there's nothing that I can personally see at this point that's part of the Planning and Zoning Board's recommendations that we would potentially incorporate in the ordinance that are going to change the previous discussions that we've had on the development of this ordinance.
I still think
Plus,
it's
you already have Mike's input on what you sent to the Planning and Zoning Board.
Yes.
We've had two closed discussions, if I recall correctly, with Mike over the last 5 or 6 months in general.
Going back to the recommendation that I think Patrick made, so maybe all of you are, if you have this conversation at your next regular meeting, you can make a preliminary decision, right? And you can then have a conversation with Mike in closed session at the end of that night. And then you do the public hearing. Well, there's no obligation for you to make the final decision after, on the immediate heels of that public hearing, right? So you'll have had the opportunity to listen to what Mike says. You'll have the opportunity to listen to what the public says about what your preferred course of action looks like. And then you can deliberate on that and
I think the next meeting, our
next meeting
would be our final vote.
Or at that meeting, or you could direct some further changes or make, direct changes at the, or adopt with changes at the next meeting. The point is, everybody, you're going to get all the input you need, I think.
If I could just generally brainstorm with my colleagues here for a minute, I think the question comes down to when do we have which meeting? And I think I'd like to hear from the public in response to the Planning and Zoning Board's recommendations, which were based on our recommendations to the Planning and Zoning Board. So the public, I think, gets the gist of what is the debate right now. And so that's why I'm leaning towards, let's have our September 27th meeting open to the public and provide us their input and comments, much like they did with the P&Z. And then after that, we could discuss a little, we would go into closed session, and then we would come back in 2 weeks with our final product and our final decision as a council. I think that, I can be persuaded otherwise, but I think that's a cleaner way to do it than for us to do something before all this and then call them, have the public come back in and say, well, now you've changed this and that, and I don't know. That's my thought. Jeff, I'm going to ask you.
Yeah, actually, I don't think that's unreasonable.
I would suggest the other way, and you had me thinking, and
Yeah, it's not unreasonable, and to have input on there. I certainly would support that. I think you're going to accomplish the goal. What definitely needs to happen, and I understand Lydia's point on this, is I want to hear from more of a finalized product here in a closed session from Mike, okay? And I think we definitely need to have that we talked about that from day one. And that needs to occur before the 5 of us decide on what the final product is, okay? And if there needs to be amendments or whatever to it, then that allows. And Jeff just articulated that would occur. So I think it's reasonable. And definitely give the public opportunity to talk about it, give Mike opportunity to talk about it, then we come from there. And it accomplishes the goals. So tomato, tomato.
So we still have the public hearing on the 27th for the public to come in and share with us their views. Yeah.
What about this, though? The Planning and Zoning Board made a recommendation to us. They gave advice to us. I don't really know that so much that the important part of a public hearing is not so much for the public to comment on what the planning board said, but for the public to have the opportunity to comment on what we might do. And that means, I think, that we need to gather, having worked through this initially, having now had the benefit of the Planning and Zoning Board's advices, and some more advice from Mike, and then to crunch it again ourselves to get it into some kind of a shape that's a something that incorporates all of this additional information so that when the public comes in, they're able to comment on what we might do, because otherwise, they're not going to have the opportunity to look at the product that we are proposing and to say, well, that product's, good for these reasons, but bad for those reasons. They're not going to have that chance.
That was kind of my logic when I commented before and said, let's set it up and write it. But I think Patrick brings up a good point on there, and I see the logic where he's coming from. This issue is not like it's a brand-new issue. We have beat this issue to death, okay? And so the public opinions that you're going to have coming out for the preponderance of this are going to be lots of folks who are very, very staunch in what they want to happen, both for or against. And it gives them an opportunity, and maybe we'll find some new stuff that's out there. But we're going to take it from there, and quite frankly, again, the changes that are going to be there, I think will be minimal overall from what the products that we already have. We'll see, okay? But I'm not saying from the plans, I'm saying from what has been previously described in this council meeting, okay? I don't think we're taking a big risk of having something that's, holy cow, that's totally different than what we just said, okay? So I don't think there's a big risk in doing it the way Patrick suggested, personally.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I need you to clarify something. You said something about will be very minimal from what we've already discussed, and we've gone from discussing a ban in single-family neighborhoods to planning and zoning not supporting that.
I got it.
That's not a minimal difference. Those are.
I fully understand, but do you expect the final product to be that much different from what's currently being discussed on here? And let's just lay it out there. I mean, you've got 3 people in this council that so far have already publicly stated that they're supporting the ban in single-family housing. You've got 2 people in this council saying they do not. From the Planning and Zoning Committee, it has supported on the big issue here that they do not support the ban with that. I personally would love to see a change from one of the 3, but the reason I stated my comment on there is I doubt that there's going to be a change. But the public can look at that. The public can make their comments with that and see how things will go for it. It's a very controversial topic. The question is, what's the proper process? And we definitely need to make sure the public has a say on there. No question about it. How much change is there going to be in what I just described? That's where I don't think there's much change there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I think that while there's quite a significant difference between the language that you sent to the Planning and Zoning Board and what the recommendations that they've made, I think it's pretty safe to assume that whatever the final decision looks like, it's going to be somewhere between those, those limits. So the public knows what the realm of possible outcomes looks like in general. There might be some minor permutations on this. The other thing I would add is that I was kind of struck by how little the public comments during the public hearing that the Planning and Zoning Board held had to do with the actual language of the text amendment. On both sides, it was really just more about their general perceptions of the topic. And I make that observation to make, or maybe reinforce the point that, maybe the public doesn't need to know what your final recommendation is going to look like, because you're going to hear one way or the other, whether you do it beforehand or after, they're going to come in and say the same things that we've already heard, and it's more about their general perceptions of the
Topic.
of the subject.
And there was some, and Darren can put some numbers to it, but there were several instances where the Planning and Zoning Board were unanimous in a comment, which was in agreement, or I'll say slightly modifying some things that we had sent to them, which seemed very plausible adjustments. On the sort of the biggest issue of it all, that's where the one difference was, so.
You know what, it's getting kind of late, but I have not taken this opportunity to thank Planning and Zoning for the 6+ hours they sat there the first night, the extra hours, but their discussions were thoughtful, they were circumspect, they were whatever. Another thing, and I really don't like bringing this up, but, you guys, I took notes what everybody said, I've put it in a Word document, I've highlighted things I liked, things I didn't like, but I heard people I know say things that I knew that were not true. And I texted one of the people, and I got a response back that I can't even repeat. And it's disturbing to me that things are being said that, I don't want to say that aren't accurate. And at one point I said to somebody, things like this just don't promote a healthy discussion. And I got this blowback, but we've got to make a tough decision, and we've always been taught we have to make fact-based decisions. And when you accept as true things that are being said that possibly aren't true, to me it clouds the discussion. It clouds our ability to make a good decision. And I wish I could get the word out. You guys, please do the best you can to tell us tell us stuff that's accurate.
One of the things. There's a related point I'd like to make on that, and it has to do with how these meetings take place and what we discuss. But there's still a lot of lack of information out there, or clarity in people's minds as to what we have done over, say, from January 1st to now. And Jeff Sanborn and I've talked a little bit about this, and the idea is that I think at some point at the start of one of these discussions in the next meeting or two, I'd like to lay out a sort of timeline, when we started, what we were looking at, the things we've done to get to where we are at this point in time. People still don't understand some of the restrictions we're under from the state. So we get recommendations and people speaking about things that we really can't do, and they still don't know that. So in order to provide as much clarity as possible, both as to the timeline, but also for the facts of the matter, I think this sort of presentation is something that I'd like to incorporate into one of the meetings coming up, if not 27th, probably in October. And I'd work with Jeff and all of you to just get that sort of laid out and make sure we're comfortable with what that's saying. But I think that will help to maybe clarify some things and indicate to people what we've done and how we got to where we are.
I just want to echo a little what Lydia said. I thought I watched the entire hearing. I thought Jeremy Hooper did a remarkable job of sort of moderating the event and guiding his board to get to where they got to. So I really was impressed with that. And as far as the comments and blowbacks, and, you know, there are people on either side saying some things that are not entirely accurate, that's for sure. But the most interesting comment that stuck in my mind was not a comment about the proposal. It was a comment, and I don't remember the gentleman's name, who stood up there and he said, you know, I came here tonight, and what really, I think he said, disappointed me is that nobody was smiling. And I thought to myself, what an interesting observation. He says, I'm used to going to meetings and people are smiling and laughing and so forth. Nobody was smiling. And I can't even remember what he said after that about what his position was. And I don't really think he had a clear position, so to speak, as to what was before us. But I do think for the sake of trying to get people to smile, we should obviously we fulfill our obligations with another hearing, and then try to discuss this in as orderly and objective fashion as we can. Thank you.
John, to your point, excuse me one more second. I feel like we're playing intellectual ping pong here. To your point about controlling authorities, and maybe this is the attorney in me, but there are two things that I'm not hearing. And one is the protections afforded by the North Carolina Constitution, the private property rights. But another one, somebody just mentioned to me yesterday, the Vacation Rental Act, and I pulled it, and I went, oh my goodness, this was written by the legislature in 1999 because the growth of tourism industry in North Carolina led to a greatly expanded market of privately owned residents. We're doing this for the General Assembly to enact laws regulating the competing interest of landlords, real estate brokers, and tenants. And I had no idea that there's a state statute that could have some implication here. So there's some controlling legal authorities that I think are not being a part of the discussion that are probably relevant to the discussion. Constitution and Vacation Rental Act.
Well, I think the main question we're trying to resolve is when we have the public hearing. And I think that the point that Jeff's been speaking back to and Patrick made is, at least where some of us are. Should we repeat what that is?
Well,
It's public hearing on the 27th.
Yeah.
I can't hear.
a public hearing on the
Public hearing on the 27th.
27th.
Well, wait a second.
And then we hear in closed session from council, and then we regroup, and we will take up the final matter publicly 2 weeks hence, probably.
We have never put anything together on homestays, and neither did the Planning and Zoning Board. And yet I feel that it should be a part of whatever we put together. And we need to at least have something to start with there.
There is
We
something
did
there.
specifically ask the Planning and Zoning Board to help us with that, and they didn't, but, you know, so now it's back to us. That's number one. Number two,
There is something on homestays. There's a definition of homestays, and that the Planning and Zoning Board.
Well, there's a definition, but there's.
Did make a recommendation that we make a further effort to distinguish that from bed and breakfast, and so we can contemplate that. But it's also added to the table of uses. And did they put the X's in, Darren?
No.
All right, but I mean, that's a simple matter.
But
I mean, I think,
X's.
it's not even controversial. So the only other question is whether or not we need to add in special requirements associated with homestays. And I would argue that I think everybody's way too wrapped up in this homestay thing. Because in reality, I don't think it's even happening out there. So, I was kind of amazed at the importance that the Planning and Zoning Board put in their discussion about homestays, and we gotta table this because this is too important. And I would almost recommend that you could adopt an ordinance that adds it to the table of uses with a definition and just put some X's, and if you want to make further refinements later on, you can do that. It's just not that important.
I recommend we go with the hearing on the 27th, and then we go from there. That's what I recommend. On the 27th, after?
I told you why before I disagree with that. I think we should do some work first, but.
Okay. All right. So we'll have a summary from Darren of these points that need to be resolved.
We'll have the motions.
We'll have that under discussion on the 27th. We'll have a public hearing, which will basically be a reaction from the public about what they've heard at the planning board and what they've heard from us, but the planning board particularly, I would guess. And then we'll have a closed session with Mike to go over legal matters, same day. And then we'll look to the October meetings to make our final adjustments and decisions. Sound right?
Fine here.
All right. Okay. With that resolved, is there any other business to come before the work session tonight?
May I move to adjourn the work session? Oh, additional topics. At some point, we talked about putting the traffic circle on a work session agenda. I just don't want to lose sight of that. Didn't we talk about putting the traffic circle on a work session agenda?
Does the DOT owe us another something? I kept,
Yeah, I asked them for some.
okay, that's what, that was what my last memory was.
Jeff, I know Jeff and I have talked a bit about this. Jeff's been tracking this with DOT, and we haven't let it slide away, but yes, we need to prompt them again, for sure. No, that's fine. That's a good point.
We do need to add it to a work session discussion, hopefully in the near future, but I think without getting some further input from DOT and others,
Okay.
I'm not sure what we're going to accomplish. So.
Right. Anything else for future agendas? All right, is there a motion to adjourn the work session?
Motion to adjourn the work session.
Motion by Pat Pizzell, is there a second? Second from Lydia Bosch, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The work session is concluded, thank you for your work.